Hello, hello, free thinking universe. It is great to see you, great to be with you here today. As always, Josh Klein, not quite a doctor, maybe someday, and Dr. Tim Stratton is joining me here for the second episode of Theology Thursdays Live. How you doing, Tim?
Doing good, Josh. How are you doing?
Doing fantastic. I'm excited about today. Last week, if you didn't catch last week's, you can still catch last week's. We talked about Wes Huff and his appearance on Rogan. Did you see that William Lane Craig weighed in with Sean McDowell on the whole thing?
Yeah, I haven't seen the video yet, but I saw the thumbnail of it, and I thought I'm gonna have to see that. So
yeah, I watched about half of it. I still need to get through the other half, but it's pretty good. So it's funny because though it's a response to a response of the video, so it's a response to Alex O'Connor's response. Speaking of Alex O'Connor, we will be discussing him a little bit today. But first, before we do that, we have teased this out a little bit. Free Thinking Ministries continues to grow, and we're excited about it. We've got people that are great minds, intelligent, brilliant people. I feel honored to work with. I feel honored to share the stage with them. And speaking of one of them, Dr. Peter Rasor is joining us here today. Dr. Rasor, welcome.
Hey, thanks, gentlemen. Good to see you.
It's good to have you here, Peter.
Yeah, great.
People may, if they follow us on our website, which they should, freethinkingministries.org.
Well, it's freethinkingministries.com and freethinkinc.org.
Look at that. I don't even know my own website.
Hopefully we got better than you did.
Yeah, hopefully we got new things coming up for the website soon too. Excited for that. But freethinkingministries.com, freethinkinc.org. Dr. Rasor has been a regular article contributor, but he's also going to start contributing with some video content as well. So we wanted to bring him on to introduce him to our video peoples, the people who don't like to read. Just kidding. They probably do. But Dr. Rasor, thank you for joining us. We're so excited. I think I've met you once before in person, maybe at ETS 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's been fun to read some of the stuff that you've written. So first of all, tell our viewers a little bit about yourself, kind of your history in academia, what you're doing.
Sure. I actually started out in engineering, specifically mechanical engineering. I went to Valparaiso University, which is a small private school up in Northwest Indiana, up by Lake Michigan, which I'm sure is nice and cold this time of year. And I did that for several years, even graduated with a degree, worked in that field. Obviously, I didn't stay in that field. I felt a passion and a calling to go into some kind of ministry. Wasn't sure specifically what that looked like at the time, but I ended up going to Cincinnati Christian University for my MA and MDiv in systematic theology to begin with. So my first love is basically theology, which probably for a lot of Christians who've gone to seminary, it's probably one of their first loves. And so I did that, and just to make a long story short, what ended up happening is I found that I wanted to teach. I wanted to be able to go deeper. And what really drove me to continue my education after the master's degree was wanting to be able to answer people's questions. So there was definitely a sort of apologetic element to it. One of the influences upon me at the time was Lee Strobel's first book, Case for Christ. And I recall reading that book when it came out. This was actually just prior to going to get my master's. And I just thought it was just amazing. And I was enamored and in awe of how Lee Strobel went around to these various professors and was able to ask these questions. And man, they knew this stuff. This was really cool. I want to know that stuff, you know? And so that's what sort of sent me off into that trajectory ultimately. And so I ended up going to the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky. Had to jump through a hoop, did my THM first. And in fact, that was probably a blessing in somewhat of a disguise because I had originally applied to the doctoral program in systematic theology, but I didn't have enough philosophy and worldview studies, and so they wanted me to do the THM. But I kept my focus still in systematic theology. But because I loaded up on so much philosophy and apologetics, I fell in love with it, and I was like, "Now this is me. This is what I'm looking for." And so when I reapplied to the PhD program, I went into philosophy, and as they say, the rest is history.
Awesome. And you've been involved in academia for quite some time. Grand Canyon University, most recently, right?
Yeah. I taught there from 2015 until early 2023. And so I was there as an assistant professor of philosophy for those 8 years in Phoenix, Arizona. Did what typical faculty members do, teaching courses, being on committees, things like that. Also doing some writing when I could at that time. And just in the past 2 years, got called back into the pastoral ministry. And so that's where I'm at now. I'm in actually Lilburn, Georgia, which is a suburb of Atlanta. And so I've been here for 2 years pastoring, but still writing, still loving the academic aspects of things. I suppose if one were to take a brief view of my life, I've always had one foot in academia and one foot in the local church.
Yeah.
And I guess because to me, they sort of balance each other out.
Yeah.
If you're
definitely.
a faculty member, you can't forget the local church.
Mm-hmm.
If you're in the local church, honestly, you can't forget the academy, although
Preach it.
although the local church has, by and large, as we probably all know, shall I say, has lost its mind.
All right.
the
awesome.
intellectual mind side of the faith. And so I've always found it somewhat helpful to have a foot in both worlds. Sometimes I've been full-time in the ministry world. Sometimes I've been full-time in the academia world. So,
well, I love the fact that you're a PhD philosopher and a pastor. So I found that it's really difficult for many in academia to be able to communicate to the layman. But that's your job now. You've left academia. I mean, still keeping a foot in that door and still doing work in that area. But your job now is to communicate with the average person, regular people in the real world. While not turning your back on the philosophical precision that you're used to, but still being able to give a good sermon on Sunday morning. I mean, has that been a challenge to bridge that gulf between those two worlds?
In some ways it has been, in other ways it hasn't been. What I mean by that is that in the way that it has been, it's in the sense of it takes work, and I have to be intentional about making sure that when I'm preaching and teaching, I have to keep in mind that they're not going to be familiar with same terminology, for example, that I am. And I have to figure out a way to convey to those in my church body that they are dealing with these same issues that we are dealing with in the academy, academic philosophy and theology. They just are experiencing it in a different way and interacting with it in a different way. They're doing it in a pop culture way, but all of that stuff, to use a better term, worldview stuff, comes from the academic world. And so in that sense, it can be difficult. And there are times, I have to be very intentional, I have to slow down. I have to think about my vocabulary. I don't want to use certain words because they won't know what I'm talking about. In other ways, it's been somewhat easy at times because I would probably say for several reasons. One is, and I should say, Dr. Jack Cottrell.
Yeah, I was going to bring him up soon.
Yeah, he was my master's advisor at Cincinnati Christian Seminary, and wrote my MDiv thesis under him. And one of the things about him that he always just pounded into us constantly was the ability to translate, if you will, deep theological truths to the common person. He didn't mean common person in a disparaging way either.
Right.
He just meant to the non-academic types. And I'll never forget, he always said, tell them what so, but then tell them so what. In other words, tell them what the facts are in such a way that they can understand, but then you got to tell them why it's important, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that was pounded into me so much, and I saw a great example of that from him that I sort of picked up on it quite a bit. You know, I was taught that, also just being around him for several years and being a friend of his for a long time, kind of picked it up by osmosis in some ways. So in that sense, I feel like I've had some success being able to convey difficult topics and theological truths at a level where people can understand it. Now, that being said, there's still going to be some that, you know, I don't hit, you know. And, you know, I see it as my responsibility as a pastor to try to hit the middle so that you challenge those who are below, but then those who are above the middle, they're being fed really well. So in one sense, you push a certain group of people in the church, but then the others, you're really feeding them in the church. And at some point, those who are below that middle, they'll get into the top tier as well. So then they'll be able to be fed just as much as the other ones are being fed. So I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's kind of how I see it.
Yeah, I really, I think it was Jack, Dr. Cottrell, who, I think it was through him that you and I got to know each other, because
I think so. I don't remember the specifics, but I think you're right.
Yeah. But he and I became Facebook friends. I never had the privilege of meeting him in person, but we, it's funny. I remember I got into a debate with him and I had no idea who he was. This was years ago. And he and I found ourselves on the same thread with a local pastor here in my area. And so I thought this guy was just some local guy. And what were we debating? It might have been, I know one of our disagreements was Molinism, but we both thought that Calvinism was false, and we were both libertarian freedom fighters, you know. Yeah. But so it was probably that we were discussing.
It probably was. Yeah. Most likely it was.
So, yeah. But we found a lot to agree on and became good friends. And he actually joined the Mere Molinism Facebook page that I started.
Yes, he did.
And even though he wasn't a Molinist, he provided some great conversations on that page. And I learned a lot from him as well. But you were really blessed to really work under his, to have him, take you under his wing and teach you the ways of the Force.
Yes. Yeah.
He how long ago was it that he went to be with Jesus?
I think it was about 2.5 years ago now.
Was it that long already?
Yeah.
Yeah. Great guy. Well, praise God that God used Jack to bring us together. And if it wasn't for Jack, then you wouldn't be a part of Free Thinking Ministries today. There's a counterfactual for you. So
that's right. That's right.
Yeah. So we do a lot of long form content here on the Free Thinking Ministries YouTube and now X and Facebook. You can find us on all of those. So anybody watching, give us a like, share, subscribe to all of these. I'm contractually obligated to say those things. But we do a lot of long form stuff. We love the long form stuff. But one of the things, as you and I were talking, was that you were starting this podcast called The 5-Minute Thinker, which is just like 5 minutes of being able to help people think. And that is content that you have on your personal YouTube right now that we're also going to be publishing soon, coming soon to Free Thinking Ministry. So why don't you talk about the impetus of that? Why did you decide to do that? And what is the goal to come out of that?
I mean, let me just interrupt you because I think I can answer that for him, because he knew Bobby Conway was out there with the 1-minute apologist. And he's like, I'm going to be 5 times better and give you the 5-minute thinker. So take that, Bobby.
80% more content.
Oh my. No, it actually had nothing to do with that. Although I am familiar with Bobby's.
He's a great guy, good friend.
Yeah, look, I've never actually met him in person, but I've seen a lot of his stuff. So, but and in fact, I use a lot of his stuff for some of my online classes that I teach adjunctly. But that aside, no, it had nothing to do with that. It's something I've actually been thinking about for a long time. I was still actually teaching at Grand Canyon University in Phoenix, so over 2 years ago now. And it's something I've had the desire to do for some time. And the thought behind it was this. I wanted to start something that could teach something very concise and thoughtful in a short time frame. And obviously, it's not going to be exhaustive. You can't do that in 5 minutes, but that's not the point. Mm-hmm. The point is to make people in our culture to stop and just think. And I thought, just 5 minutes. That's what popped into my head. Just give me 5 minutes. I'm going to give you a nugget or two to think about. And really, it's kind of a teaching YouTube kind of podcast, But the hope is not just to teach, but to get people to think. And I think that even in teaching, even though I'm just basically, for example, my first one that came out last week, it was just basically focused on the idea, I want you to think, right? The one that's coming out tomorrow is on philosophy. What is it? Why is it important? Now, it's just basic. I'm just teaching like I would be in a classroom, sort of like, But when you listen to things like that, you actually start thinking, right? Whether you agree with it or not. And that's the point. And the reason why is because our culture, it just doesn't think, right? I mean, let's be honest. What do we spend most of our time doing? And I catch myself doing it. I just get on YouTube. I scroll around on Facebook, and a lot of it is just garbage and entertainment, I mean, let's just be honest. I find old things I used to like watching when back in the 90s and 80s, and I find someone's posted all online. I'm like, and I eat it all up, Boy, I could spend a lot better time than doing that. A lot better things than doing that. So I want to provide something that's short. Our attention span is short in America, and in the West in general. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to provide something like that. And especially, I think it's going to be helpful for those universities that have online programs. You can take this it's a 5-minute video, man, and just plug it right into your discussion forums. Mm-hmm. That's what I do at Grand Canyon University. I teach online for them. And so I'll be able to take these little short videos, throw it in there and say, discuss.
Right.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah. Nice.
That's great.
So that's the whole idea behind it.
Awesome. Well, we're excited to have that. I'm excited to share that with the rest of the Free Thinking team. There you go. Thank you.
If you say something like this, it's guaranteed to get put on the screen. So
yeah, exactly. Flattery will get you everywhere.
That's right.
What was I saying? Oh, okay. So we're excited to have that content. What made you decide? We've kind of been having a conversation, and then after this question, we're going to move into actually analyzing my second favorite atheists conversation with Justin Brierley. Richard's my first favorite, but
Richard settles.
Alex is my second. So anyway, what made you decide, what, Free Thinking Ministries is kind of a place that I'll allow to publish some of my content there?
Our how shall I say it? I guess the content of our worldview, belief systems line up very well. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm a libertarian free will guy. And back when I was in my PhD work, I really worked hard to try to grasp Molinism and all that sort of a thing. That's probably back when Tim was probably having a debate with Cottrell online. Because Cottrell just kept saying, oh, it's determinism. It's another form of determinism of some sort. Yeah. And so I was really curious if it was. And so I really dug deep. I even went and got Molina's book and, the translation, and read it, and read a bunch of Craig's stuff, on and on and on and on. I really wanted to figure it out. And of course, that's when I came across Tim's stuff. And somehow, as it's already been mentioned, probably through our mutual friend and colleague, Jack Cottrell, but I found that he started this ministry online. I'm like, what is this? He's like banging on Calvinism, man. That's kind of cool. I'll check this guy out. So I checked some of the stuff out. I'm like, hey, that's cool. And then, of course, he has a lot of other things that I entirely agree with that he's written on. I'm sure there are some that we disagree on, but I haven't found any yet. Just to be honest, I haven't found any yet. But we haven't had a whole lot of chance or opportunity to have in-depth discussions either, which I'm sure we'll disagree somewhere. But that's pretty much what led me to do it. Yeah.
Well, that's fun. When you find somebody that you have so much in common with and you agree so much with, it's fun then to start trying to find the different areas where you might see things a little differently. Josh and I, we found those areas at EPSs, and we're roommates, and we're trying to we're talking into the wee hours of the night, finding, like debating different things. Like, okay, we agree on 99% of stuff. Let's find this 1% and hammer it home. Yeah. Even with Dr. Craig, I've got that. I agree with almost everything he says all the time, but he and I have even had some fun trying to find some extreme things that we see things differently upon, and then we discuss it. And so, hey, it's just iron sharpening iron. And when you can do that and have fun and love each other in the process and respect one another, it's even better. So we'll let the world know when we find something, Peter.
Yeah,
absolutely.
We'll write something.
Yeah,
that's right.
Live debate,
Peter,
throttle each other.
Yeah. Well, welcome to the team. We're excited to have you. We're excited to have the 5-Minute Thinker as part of our podcast platform stuff on Free Thinking Ministries, at least for the time being. And we're looking forward to interacting more. Today, we are going to interact with some comments with a video with Alex O'Connor. If you don't know who Alex O'Connor is, he used to be known as Cosmic Skeptic, and he's kind of grown out of that moniker. They actually talk about that in this. And are you aware of Justin Brierley, Peter?
I am not familiar with him, no.
Justin Brierley, big fan of his. He's over in England. And he did something called the Unbelievable podcast for a really long time. I don't think he's affiliated with
okay. I'm familiar with that podcast. Okay, I just wasn't
familiar. I knew you'd know who he was as soon as you said Unbelievable.
Yeah, as soon as you said that, I knew exactly what it was,
and he's got, I think, a book coming out called The Surprising Return of the Belief in God. Did I get that right, Tim?
Yeah, actually, it's pretty close. I just saw that advertised the other day,
Yeah. So this is kind of part of a podcast, I don't know, a podcast that he's been doing to kind of promote that book. He sat down with Alex a while ago and kind of debated the premise of his book. And this one, though, it's about a 40-minute video. He sits down with Alex to just talk about Alex outgrowing new atheism. And I found it fascinating. There's some things that he says in here that we want to discuss. So, and full disclosure, as everyone that's following along, Peter did not know he was going to be hanging out for this part of the video. So, if Tim or I sound stupid, that's our fault. But Peter wasn't aware of this video until literally like 10 minutes before we went live.
Now, to be fair, I was only aware of this video like 2 hours ago. I watched it though, so.
Okay, yeah, but I mean, I sent it to you last week too, so that's, come on, Tim, come on. All right, priorities. So they do like an introduction thing for quite a while. We're not going to watch the whole thing, obviously. The whole thing is in the description of the video, so you can click there, watch the whole thing. Do that after this, though. Don't watch our thing and then go watch that whole thing. But we are going to be reacting to this. This is the first. I thought Tim would get a kick out of this part because they're talking about things that he's grown out of. And the first thing is some arguments that he didn't really understand when he was younger. And it's the ontological argument. So I want to watch parts of this. And then we're going to react to some of the things Alex says. Sound good?
Let's do it.
All right.
get on with them. But the argumentative quality, of course, I'm going to look back now and think is not very good.
Can you guys hear okay? Sorry.
Yep.
I got it, man.
Awesome.
I was so young. I mean, I'm still young. I still don't know what I'm talking about. Nor does anybody when it comes to these big subjects. We can only ever try our best. But I do look back in particular at some of the videos that I made that were a little bit more serious. In particular, I think of the ontological argument video that I made. I made a video about, it was responding to William Lane Craig's little cartoon on the modal ontological argument. And it's so clear listening back now that I just didn't understand the argument. And fair enough, I guess I didn't at the time. That may have been the first time I'd encountered that version of the argument, not really realizing that it was his own version. But the way I'm talking about it, having now spent more hours than anybody should ever have to talking about the ontological argument.
See this property on Craigslist for $4,300.
Everybody needs an ad.
Yeah. I'm not giving you free ad time. There we go.
And not just publicly, but privately too, you know. And I look back and I think, this is really bad. I'd take it down if it weren't for the fact that I kind of want to show this progression a little bit. I was going to do a response video to it, actually, debunking myself.
Responding to yourself. Yeah.
Already got a bit of a problem at the moment with a reputation for going a bit soft on belief in God. I mean, we recorded a podcast for my show, and you referenced the fact that many people seem to think I'm going to be converting to Christianity because I'm so nice to the people that I talk to. So I think a video debunking my old atheist video might
cement that view too much.
In that video.
Okay, so that's the first part of that that I wanted to discuss. It's funny because I just told someone, I wonder if Alex is starting to feel a pull towards Christianity, and he kind of says, I guess I'm being too soft. But Tim, you and I have discussed the ontological argument in the past, and that it gets a bad rap. And it seems like Alex agrees. I remember that video. Did you ever watch that video?
Oh yeah,
Alex's video on the ontological.
Oh no, I didn't watch his, but I watched William Lane Craig's.
Yes. So remind people as they're watching what the ontological argument is, and then I was gonna go to Alex's channel and look at that, but we're not gonna do that. But it's interesting that that's the argument I think that Alex chose to say I was wrong. I didn't understand that argument.
Right.
So remind people who are watching what the ontological argument is, and then
the ontological argument. You can find information on it at freethinkingministries.com. I've written some stuff on it. I did a little video about the ontological argument myself. It's like a 3 to 5 minute video for Frank Turek for
I remember that.
I think it's Faith Examined YouTube channel. So I encourage people
to go there. Pizza?
Yeah, I had a Maxwell pizza in there, but the whole thing of the ontological argument has to do with is it possible that God exists, or more specifically, is it possible that a maximally great being exists? And the argument uses modal logic and eventually shows that if it's even possible for God to exist as a maximally great being, then God must exist. Now, I got to tell you, when I first heard that argument, I didn't understand it either. I mean, when I was first exposed to the ontological argument in 2009, so this is still prior to me going to Biola. It was right in that little window of time when I realized I need to start, as a youth pastor, I need to start learning apologetics. And so I got into things like the Kalam and the moral argument, and I was understanding those. Then finally, one of the last arguments I got to was this thing called the ontological argument. One of my friends in passing told me, he's like, yeah, if it's even possible that God exists, then he must exist. I'm like, what are you talking about? I can't remember who first referred to this. Dr. Craig quotes the guy. That's off the top of my head, I can't think of it. But somebody referred to the ontological argument as a charming joke. And that was really my first reaction to it as well. But I got to tell you, the more I've studied it, the more I'm convinced that this is a sound argument. The premises seem to be true. The structure of the argument is valid. And if that's the case, the deductive conclusion must be true. And so I think it's a sound argument. Do I think it's convincing? Well, what does that mean? Does it convince most people? No, because it's really hard to understand. It took me forever to finally grasp it. And it looks like Alex O'Connor's in the same boat. It took him quite a while. He was doing videos on why he thought it was debunked and why it was just a charming joke himself. And then over time, he's like, oh, wait a second, there's something to this. So being a convincing argument is different than being a sound argument. So do I think it's a convincing argument? No, at least not in the sense that it's going to convince most people or even many people. Do I think it's a sound argument? Yes. And I have seen at least a couple people actually that the ontological argument was the deal breaker for them. They realized that atheism was false and that God exists. And moreover, they realized that the God revealed by Jesus makes the most sense of being a maximally great being. So ultimately led them to Christianity, or to Christian theism in particular. But yeah, I think it's a sound argument. And speaking of the ontological argument, and since we've already introduced Peter, let me take this opportunity to announce another contributor who just joined Free Thinking Ministries, and that's Phil Kahlberg. He's a wonderful philosopher who specializes in the ontological argument. And he and I just co-authored an academic journal article together. We've just submitted it. It's entitled, "Is Divine Determinism a Different Gospel?" So we are really looking forward to getting that out there. But Phil's going to be doing a lot more on Free Thinking Ministries. We've also brought on another young man named Thomas Muller, who's a student at Houston Christian University right now. So we will have both Phil and Thomas on the show soon. And, every once in a while, I'm sure we'll get the entire team, the three of us and those guys, and we'll have some fun doing some videos together.
That sounds dangerous. I think Michael Knowles of the Daily Wire is the only one I've ever heard say that the ontological argument is what convinced him that atheism wasn't true, which I find interesting. And he said it, and I was like, oh, really? Interesting. Before we move to the next clip, Peter, does anything strike you about the ontological argument, the difficulty in grasping it, that sort of thing?
Well, here's what's interesting to me. Tim talked about it being convincing and answered more in the negative. And you sort of echoed that just a moment ago. And what's interesting to me is teaching at the university level for 20 plus years now, and especially at Grand Canyon University, where every persuasion is basically present, in the classroom, atheist, skeptic, Christian, Buddhist, etc. I have found quite a few students who really like the ontological argument and think it's great, which really shocked me and surprised me, coming from academia, because that is probably the one that's most bludgeoned among the theistic arguments. Is it difficult to grasp? I think it actually kind of is. I think the more difficult one to grasp is actually the more contemporary one that you see in Craig's video. Of course, it's very similar to Alvin Plantinga's ontological argument. But if you look at Anselm's argument, that one's a little bit easier to understand, not to read, mind you. But if you have someone sit down in an introductory philosophy class and teach it to you, that's pretty easy to understand. But
see, I'm not.
It is very abstract. So, yeah, it is difficult.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
I think. We should give respect where it's due and sing Anselm's praises here, because guys like Plantinga and Craig wouldn't have had shoulders to stand on if it wasn't for Anselm. But I do think Plantinga's version and Craig's version are stronger than
absolutely
Anselm's version. But that's also probably what makes it harder to understand, is because they go in the deep weeds of philosophy and get into modal logic and things like that. So.
Yeah, I'm more comfortable with Craig's and Plantinga's, and I think theirs, if I can say it this way, work. I think their versions work, whereas Anselm's, there's a little bit of a hiccup there for me, like Immanuel Kant and others criticized him for, which was the idea of necessity. I'm not sure what to do with that, or exactly how Anselm is looking at the idea of necessity. And so I can kind of understand the critique of Anselm in the sense that he just jumps from possibility to necessity, and it's like, okay, how did we get there?
Yeah.
Well, Josh, before you start playing the clip, let me make another, a couple more comments here.
Yep.
I just want to say, regarding Alex O'Connor here, it's been fun to watch his evolution. I wrote him off for quite a while because I saw some of his videos as a young teenager where he's pretty bombastic and making some obvious errors. And I was like, all right, I just didn't take him seriously for a long time. But now he's gone to Oxford, I believe, has a degree in philosophy, and he's much more careful and precise and respectful in his and if it wasn't, so I've really enjoyed watching that transformation. And if it wasn't for his debate with Ben Shapiro, well, that debate that those two had a year and a half ago, not even that long ago.
Probably about a year ago.
But yeah, a little over a year, because that led to shortly thereafter my debate with Alex Malpass. So yeah, another counterfactual. If it were not for Alex O'Connor's debate with Ben Shapiro, I would not have debated Alex Malpass. And the topic really with both of these debates was on free will, or more specifically libertarian free will. And I argued that that we have to have it. I know we all agree on that. But I also wanted to say what I enjoy about Alex is that he has left his old stuff up on YouTube, where he was a bombastic teenager, throwing out F-bombs and everything. And he does that, he says, even though he's ashamed of those videos, because he wants people to see the transformation. And I can relate to that. There's, even though I wasn't a teenager, in my early days of apologetics, I was, I looked at some of the stuff that I wrote, and I go back and I look at some of those blogs, some early videos, and I cringe myself. And I really thought, well, should I delete these or not? And I was like, no, for the exact same reason that Alex has chosen to leave his stuff up. I agree. It's fun to let people see us grow. It's like basically the blog now becomes kind of like an online journal for everybody, or not a journal, but like a diary, my personal diary that people can see, and they can watch how even my beliefs, what ones have stayed the same, what ones have grown stronger, what ones I've abandoned during this transformation. And so I respect what Alex is doing there. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting because when you do that, there are people on a lot of sides of the aisle that will say, "Oh, you just keep changing your mind over things, and you keep introducing new stuff." And you go, "Well, yeah, because I've adapted because of me being able to learn," and that's something that Alex has done as well. Obviously, the British accent definitely helps his case. It's smooth and sounds good. But I want. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, see, where it's always okay to change your beliefs and make them stronger and to grow is within Christianity, but you can't do it in politics.
Yeah.
That's true. I mean, like 10 years ago, you said one thing, and now you're saying something else. That means you're a flip-flopper. You can't grow.
So you must be a static individual.
That's right.
Yeah.
Hey, one more thing. Sorry, Josh, but look at this comment here. I don't know. How do you say this? Cyphus?
Oh, yeah. I don't know.
Ignitus? I don't know. Okay.
Ignitus? Cyphus Ignitus?
That sounds like a stage name. I like that.
Right. Yeah. I like the name. Yeah. He says, of course, the supreme being exists. It's just not the one you all claim to think, nor is what you say he is. And I would say, well, that's an interesting
comment. You do agree that he is a he.
Yeah. No, okay.
So not an it.
No. Yeah, no, I think this is a great comment. It's an assertion, nothing to back it up, but I have backed it up. And as I noted earlier, some folks who have been persuaded of the ontological argument have then realized that it is Christianity. It is the God that Jesus revealed that makes the most sense of this maximally great being. And in fact, I have so much of my work now, and you can find this in my book on mere Molinism. You can find it in the book called Faith Examined, where I contributed a chapter there. It's focused on a maximally great being who is perfect in knowledge, omniscient, perfect in power, omnipotent, perfect in love, omnibenevolent. And when you factor in all of these things, we start saying what we should expect, and we can start answering the problems of evil, I think, quite nicely with power, with force and persuasion. And so I would disagree with our friend Cyphus Ignitus and say, yes, I do. Well, I do agree with you that a maximally great being or a supreme being exists, but I would say it is the God that Jesus revealed. And I would love to have that conversation with anybody, but that's another topic for another time. And we do want to say hi to Trinity Radio. Yeah, make sure you watch their latest video, 20 questions for Calvinists. Just came out like an hour or two ago. So yeah. All right.
Came out right before we went live. All right, we're never going to get through this. All right, let's this part Justin Brierley kind of threw in there, and I want to play it because it just kind of gives me a chuckle. And then we'll move on to the next part. I don't know how much commentary we'll have, but there you go.
In the God delusion, and he makes a pretty botched job of it, I think. Doesn't really take it very seriously, you know.
I've forgotten the details, but I once piqued a gathering of theologians and philosophers by adapting the ontological argument to prove that pigs can fly. They felt the need to resort to modal logic to prove that I was wrong.
Well, this is just embarrassing. The ontological argument just is an exercise in modal logic, the logic of the necessary and the possible. I can just imagine what the philosophers and theologians whom Dawkins piqued at that conference must have been thinking.
So the actual content itself.
So I just wanted to play that part because it makes me laugh. But it goes to show, like, I'm sure Richard Dawkins is a fantastic biologist.
He is,
but a philosopher he is not.
That's right.
And he wades into that realm way too often, and kind of makes a fool of himself. I don't know if you ever saw his conversation with Jordan Peterson, but I don't think it went well for Richard Dawkins.
No.
But yeah, let's move on here. The next one is at 10:50. Let's see if I can. Here we go.
Have you seen this?
Have you seen this,
No,
guys?
I haven't seen that. No.
Oh, okay.
Nice ad though.
Yeah, it's a good ad. Okay, here we go.
And I thought, oh my goodness, I've made this person fail. You know, like this is. I think to myself.
So in context, this is comments that he got on his video on the ontological argument, saying that he's covered 20% of his A-level philosophy exam, and he taught him more than his teacher. And Alex here is saying, "Oh my goodness, I just made this person fail."
Wow.
So that's the context. Here you go.
It would have been so easy for me at the time, which is certainly what I did, to look at this material, look at what people are saying, and say, "Yeah, cool, I'm great at this. This is fantastic." And so you sort of become consumed with arrogance and pride. And so realizing that you're wrong about a lot of these things, and realizing how confident you were, not just due to general confidence, but due to the fact that you were having people telling you all the time, you know, "Oh, this is great material." And now realizing how wrong that was makes me very careful now. Like I wouldn't want to put forth that style of argumentation that says, "Well, this is why I'm right. I know that I'm right, and yeah, people who disagree with me are wrong and silly," and this kind of thing, which is not quite what I was saying, but there's a sort of attitude about it, right? Which I tried to move away from.
There's a certain sort of rhetoric that goes with that approach, which it feels like that's softened in the way that you bring.
But it's unhelpful to have conversations generally. Yeah, it's great for sort of making a bit of content or something, or, you know, in a debate, having that moment you can clip, that kind of thing. But you know, I've been the victim of that myself many times. You know, people are always clipping things that I'm doing and doing the same thing, and I just realized
and we are doing that right now to Alex O'Connor. We're clipping the things that he's doing. Thoughts on that? Just his realization that he's been wrong, and any thoughts on that clip there that spring to mind?
Well, just the only thing that I would say is if one's goal is objective truth, then realizing that you're wrong about a specific issue, that's not a defeat, that's a victory. You know, in fact, if one's goal is truth, then you can never lose. You're always in a win-win situation. So you're either going to see that what you believe is currently right and justified, and so you're like, yeah, that's a victory. Or you're like, oh wait, I was thinking about this incorrectly. I'm going to change my view to match reality. Well, surely that's not a defeat either. That's a victory. So yeah, amen to that. As long as, if your goal is always the objective truth and nothing but the truth, and you're sincere about that, then there's going to be times when you're wrong. But when you realize you're wrong, you change your mind, and that's a victory. So you should always be willing. I've changed my mind on so many things. And especially early on when I got into apologetics and theology and philosophy. And I changed my mind less these days, but I'm always willing to change my mind. I just need good arguments and evidence.
Have you ever heard of Warren Smith? You guys know who that is? Warren Smith?
Not ringing a bell.
You probably do. He's a YouTube guy. He ended up losing his job as a professor because he challenged a student's feelings on J.K. Rowling. And he talked about how he just was basically doing the Socratic method. Okay, how do you know that?
Yeah, he was he was a YouTube guy, right? He put it on YouTube.
Well, he was a professor. Now he's on YouTube. His name's Warren Smith.
I've seen that video.
He's really good. I like listening to him. But he says that same thing. He says you only lose if you're trying to win. If you only lose if you're trying to win. What you should be doing is looking for the truth. Then you'll never lose. You'll just find the truth. So it's kind of piggybacks off of what you were saying. Peter, you are teaching a lot. Do you find kids are generally malleable to learning that they're wrong, or do they kick against it these days? What are your?
No, they don't like being wrong whatsoever. They often take on the aura of they know more than the professor. They think if they give the impression that they're at least equal, if not better, in knowledge and understanding than the professor is. That I would say that's pretty much the overall impression that I get. But I do want to make a practical point here, and actually it connects nicely with your question. When Alex is talking about his earlier videos, right, very bombastic and all that sort of thing. Well, he's obviously a pretty young kid, right? And that's about how your average college student acts and thinks. Okay. I know that may sound a little bit harsh, but it's just the fact of the matter.
You speak from experience.
I speak from my own anecdotal experience. And this is what I would say from a practical standpoint. Why would any teenager get on and make a YouTube cast or podcast, whatever you want to refer to it as, and start trying to demolish the ontological argument? I'm sorry, but, a 16-year-old, unless you're a genius, right? One of those that can go to Harvard at 16 years old or something, okay. But your average teenager, why are you getting on YouTube or social media and trying to flex your muscle and show you how stupid Anselm is, or something? I mean, that is just outrageous to me and absolutely over the top. I mean, what kind of pride and ego do you have to do that? I know that may sound a little harsh, but but honestly, let's look at it real.
But I mean, Alex agrees with you.
Shooter, so I'm just speaking what's coming to my mind here. I mean, why would you do that?
To be fair to Alex, Alex today would be saying the same thing to Alex as a teenager.
Sure.
So Alex today is in full agreement with you.
Yeah,
Peter.
Yeah, no, yeah. And I understand that from seeing the video, which is a good thing. But there's a lot of people out there who aren't willing to admit that. And then we see, I see a lot of my online students still today where they get all their information from TikTok and YouTube. And most of the stuff on there, if we're going to be honest, they don't know what they're talking about. Or Richard Dawkins. He may have some great biology and all that sort of thing, but man, you got to stay in your lane if you don't know it. You have to know your own limitations. And to be honest about them. And when you're young, it's very hard to admit that and to play in your own lane because when you're young, you think you know everything, right? Look at teenagers. If you're a father of a teenager, that's the case, right? They think they know everything. They don't know anything. They end up making a lot of foolish errors and mistakes. And so that's something we need to convey as pastors, theologians, philosophers to students and those in the church is, look, wait until you actually know what you're talking about and you've studied it, and you've actually looked at it. Don't just read a sort of one book on it and be like, oh, now I can do a YouTube cast on this,
Yeah. It's interesting to hear you say that. And then we're going to get into the next clip towards the end. That's the end of the video. It's kind of where I want to camp out a little bit towards the end of it. But it's interesting that you say that, because part of what I do, and part of the reason I came on Free Thinking Ministries, because I saw all these, I call it TikTok theology, TikTok philosophy. And I'm just conversing with Tim like, this is bad. Like, this is really bad. And it sounds good. And I had kids in youth group and in my youth group, and that had just recently graduated out of the youth group. I had them being convinced by these sorts of arguments. They're not reading the books. They're not going to class. They're trying to learn philosophy from TikTok, theology from TikTok. And I said, we have to go into this realm to combat some of this, and not just us, but so many other people. So as much as you're right, like the hubris of starting a YouTube channel as a teenager to explain why you think Anselm's stupid or William Lane Craig is dumb, which is like, good luck, right? It also is the impetus for Christians to not cede the public square, that area, to those people, to actually jump in, to be able to be a part of the conversation. So speaking of conversations, he is going to talk about the new, what does it look like now? What does a new interest in God mean among intellectuals? So this is kind of Justin Brierley's thesis, I guess, and they're going to have a short conversation about this. And then I really want to hit the 29-minute mark, because I think that is probably the price of admission for this video is at the 29-minute mark. So let's talk about this part first, though.
Drifted away from it in some way. I think there were a lot of others who were just interested in being around intellectually interesting people, and kind of interesting cultural sort of dynamics going on there. I feel like some of that energy of that movement has, in a sense, gone over to other thinkers who aren't particularly concerned with the label of whether they're an atheist or not. People like Jordan Peterson and Brett Weinstein and Douglas Murray, Tom Holland. There's a kind of interesting, I think, fruitful kind of interesting engagement going on in those circles, as people talk about important issues around culture, around religion, around atheism, and so on. But I get the sense, I'd just be interested in whether you feel this as well, that religion is no longer being seen as an enemy. It's sort of being seen as at one level, maybe a necessary evil almost by some people. For others, a kind of actually a good thing, a thing that actually we shouldn't wish away necessarily. What's your feeling about kind of where that conversation has gone in?
I think people are definitely less confident in the way that the new atheists in like 2006, 2007. And also I meant to say that, I think I was either 6 or 7 years old when the God Delusion came out. So when you were asking me about sort of how new atheism has changed the landscape, I'm not really the
more into Power Rangers,
the authority. Yeah. Although I guess normally I would have been a Catholic at that point. So maybe there's that. But in terms of at that time, you hear really confident portrayals of religion as this horribly evil force. I think today people might still think that religion is bad and responsible for a lot of evil, but not as confidently perhaps. And also, there's just been too much discussion and debate making it obvious that somebody who just says religion is bad just doesn't have the necessary nuance to be meaningfully talking on the subject. Enough people have responded and say, look, clearly this can't just be, like I said earlier about politics being bad. I think that's how it strikes people now. It's almost naive to say something so broad. But people still think that many forms of religious belief and religious thinking, this faith-based thinking, is still bad. But I think this idea of them...
Okay, let's stop it there. So have you guys seen that shift in the landscape as well? The shift that Justin's talking about? I find it interesting that Alex then says, I think the atheists are now no longer as confident to say that religion is this evil, this moral evil. Yeah. What are your guys' thoughts?
Well, first of all, to the question, is religion bad for the world? I have to agree with Alex here. He said it's like asking, is politics bad for the world? I would say it's like asking if worldviews are bad for the world. I mean, so that's going to now include atheism. So, are worldviews bad for the world? Well, there's got to be one truth about reality and thus one correct worldview. So if that's the case, then every false worldview is ultimately bad for the world. But that does not mean that the one true worldview is bad for the world. So in my opinion, asking if religion is bad for the world is just sloppy. And it seems to me that Alex is realizing that now as well. So that's great. I do think that religion is bad for the world, except for one. I think there's one religion that's really good for the world because it's true. But I think
Tim,
every other religion is bad.
But Tim, that means you're basically just an atheist. You just believe in one more God than
that's
the
right.
atheist.
Yeah, that's true. Well, Christians used to be called atheists because they reject the polytheism. So great. I'm a Christian atheist, I guess. But
clip that.
Mark it down.
Clip that. That's gonna be in a short.
That's right. I'm a Christian atheist that believes in the one triune God who exists necessarily. He's a maximally great being. Yes.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. We get it. We get it.
No, all right.
Peter, what are your thoughts? Having seen, I remember before you answer. I remember. I think I've told Tim this. I know I told Dr. Craig this. I was not convinced. I guess isn't the right word. I had been thrust into a season of doubt and concern about my Christian faith because of Sam Harris. I found him very convincing. I no longer find him convincing. In fact, it's interesting. He wrote, I think it was The Moral Landscape, and he talked about how facts can lead to objective morality. He never quite connects the dots. But then lately he has been shown, it's really showing why that can't be the case from himself, just the things that he is saying. It's like, okay, so the colors are being shown. Like he would vote for Joe Biden if Hunter Biden had a bunch of bodies shoved in a freezer. I'm like, okay, what objective facts led you to that objectively moral conclusion? That seems objectively immoral to me. But anyway, so I remember that vividly is what my point is, that kind of militant atheism. Have you seen that shift in the academic realm, in the academic field, the way that it seems like popular wise it has with Tom Holland? Brett Weinstein basically calls, I think, Christianity in particular a useful heuristic for ordering society. Peter, what are your thoughts as have you seen that shift and what's it looked like?
Well, I think that's actually a conversation topic, to be quite honest. That could probably take quite a while.
Oh, yeah.
I would first start as a philosopher asking, what is Alex referring to in regard to religion? What does he mean by that? Because I have Christians say religion's terrible because they believe in this dichotomy of Christianity is a relationship, not a religion.
Right.
That wonderful dictum, right? And I don't even know if they understand what they mean when they say that, because there are several places in Scripture that talks about, especially in James, that true religion is the one who takes care of orphans and widows. So obviously the word religion isn't evil, but what does he mean by religion is not necessarily bad for the world and that it's good. I mean, I agree with Tim that, there's really only one true religion that's really good for the world. But then if you were to ask me, are there elements of religions of the world that are helpful? Well, sure they are. I mean, there's a lot of overlap, especially when it comes to morality, right? I mean,
that's why we have Judeo-Christian values.
Yeah, and it's because we're made in God's image that we have this sort of similarity. But so I don't really know exactly how to answer the question quite directly because there's a lot of nuances that need to be thrown out there. Another one that I would say is religion at a practical level, and I mean talking about faith of any kind, is still very much viewed as a huge no-no in the public sphere. So if we're talking about it from that vantage point, then religion is still seen as bad, because I constantly have conversations with students who are majoring in education, who are Christians, a lot of them, and they say, I can't talk about my faith. It's against the rules, so I'm not going to.
Yeah.
And interesting enough, a lot of them think it's against the law when it's not.
Right. Well, I just tell them, well, don't talk about your faith. Talk about metaphysics.
Yeah.
There you go. But yeah, it's
so the whole idea of talking about religion anywhere in public is a big no-no to the overwhelming majority of the students that I interact with. So it really depends what you mean by religion and what are we talking about.
I think I picked that up too. Like one of the I'm doing a class on faith and culture at a church here in Omaha the next couple weekends, next few weekends, and one of the things that I talk about is that 71%, according to a recent survey, 71% of Americans have a favorable view of Jesus, but of those 71%, like 30% have an unfavorable view of the church. And so some people say, well, that just shows the church isn't representing Jesus well. And I think actually that's actually not how to analyze those statistics. There's another statistic that went out, I think a couple of years ago, that said 60% of self-proclaiming evangelicals between the ages of 18 and 40 believe that Jesus is not the only way to salvation. So to me, it seems of that 70%, that most of them actually have the wrong Jesus in mind. It's not so they're favorable to Jesus, but it's a Jesus of their own making. And so it seems to me, I'm kind of trying to tie this together before we get to the next part. It seems to me that whatever sensitivity or let's say tolerance of religion seems to be growing in academia or in the public sphere, it seems to be a very surface level. Like, okay, yeah, it's not a bad thing to believe in God, fine. But once you get into the minutia, that's when the hostility seems to come out. Do
you think there's a shift, though? Are we starting to see a shift? It seems to me like we're hopefully starting to see a shift.
Yeah,
I would say the evidence is still somewhat anecdotal. I mean, just because you get a Richard Dawkins coming out and saying, I'm a little bit more amenable to religion or something, at least that's the impression you get, right? And the same with Alex and some others. Well, I mean, that's all great and dandy, but is it enough to say there's a shift? I don't know. I mean, I think we need more information. At least I personally would. But I mean, don't get me wrong. This is great news, right? I mean, this is good stuff. At least people are being honest now, instead of trying to come off with being all confident and prideful and having no clue about what they're talking about. I mean, perfect example would be the most recent Wes Huff interview or debate with Billy. What's his last name?
Yeah,
Carson. To me, that would definitely be some evidence, perhaps, that there's a shift going on, because there were a lot of people who followed him that are just really ticked off because they, I think, finally see that he was actually a charlatan in this particular area of study. He didn't know what in the world. He was just making it up, So perhaps there is. I hope there is. And it is good to see some blowback, on some of these types of things. So, I mean, it's a positive direction in that regard. So it's just really hard to say.
I think some of the reaction, and then we'll get to the last clip here, some of the reaction is actually because culture has shifted so radically. Because I think that's Richard Dawkins' deal. I don't think he cares. I don't think he is super favorable to belief in God. I think he still would rather people not believe in God. But I think he goes, well, if the option is belief in God or wherever culture's going currently, I'd rather the belief in God. I think that's kind of the reaction. So we'll see where it goes. But I do think, especially in England, with the shift from this atheism to now, it's kind of becoming majority, like Islam has a huge impact there, and they're going, wait, we're losing all sorts of what our Western culture and values used to be, and trying to reclaim that. But I think there's almost a desire to throw the it's almost a desire to reclaim Christian culture without reclaiming Christianity, without admitting that Jesus is who he says he is.
I definitely think some people are doing that, but I think that gets us, a step closer to truth, to objective truth. And I'm seeing others. I mean, this is just anecdotal right now, but it seems to me that speaking about Christianity, speaking about Jesus, and people actually realizing, hey, maybe there's something to this. Maybe Christianity is true. Maybe I'm just an optimist, but I think we're seeing a little shift in that direction. We'll see.
Yeah, I think that's because it's now no longer frowned upon to talk about it. I think we're just going to naturally see some of the people realize, oh, it's not stupid. I think that's the biggest thing. Right. People for a long time thought it was stupid to even believe in God or to think that Jesus died, and now they're like,
and I think Alex
not actually stupid.
I think Alex O'Connor is saying that much in this video.
Yeah. Well, let's go on to the next clip, because I think that's a great segue to what he says here, and I think this is like the best part of the interview. So let's take a look.
At a personal level, you don't believe in God, as you made clear at the beginning of the interview. As you have, though, obviously engaged at a far deeper level, you did a whole theology and philosophy degree. You've taken a lot of time to look into these things. You've lived with Christians. You've really tried to understand and engage and see whether this could be true. Has the dial moved at all, even if it's even just in terms of, I don't think it's quite as unlikely as I used to think that God exists. Has there been any movement whatsoever on your?
Well, it's kind of hard to say because it's different.
Hey guys.
While the ad is playing, I love that question by Justin.
Exactly where my mind was, at any particular point in the past. There's this opening statement to a debate with Jonathan McLatchie, which I re-uploaded as a standalone video called "This Is Why I Don't Believe in God," and in the center, I talk about the fact that I've tried all of these things, that I've got my degree, that I live with Christians, that I did all kinds of things, and then I say that there was nothing, that absolutely nothing. I've experienced nothing after all of this effort that speaks to the existence of the God in the universe. And I remember thinking at the time, like, this is true in a sense and not in another. Experientially, which is kind of, I'm talking about the problem of divine hiddenness in that particular speech. And have I ever experienced something that speaks to God's existence? I can't honestly say that I have. I've had weird experiences and, moments that every human has, moments that they can't quite describe. But I wasn't like, oh, this has to be God.
The light bulb didn't come on.
You know what I mean? Yeah. I mean, I remember thinking when sometimes if I'm I'm in a sort of half dreaming state and I feel something weird and I think to myself, oh, was that something a bit religious? There's a sense in which that kind of speaks to the existence of God and considering it. So I was a little bit like, is it true? Nothing. In terms of the experience, I think probably, but in terms of arguments, I think that the arguments, I consider them more tenable now than I did before, and I think that they are that there are more of them that are essentially successful at moving the dial, and so in the intellectual space, I think I take religion or theism, I should say, much more seriously than I did before.
Okay, so that's the part I wanted to play. Anything surprising stick out to you from that clip, or anything stick out?
Yeah, I think it's it's really attention getting that he said that the dial has moved toward God, yet he hasn't, since he hasn't had some supernatural experience, that he's not going to believe it, even if he thinks these arguments are more tenable. I mean, he's definitely, if he's going to say that they're more then he's. It seems to me that he's saying that they're not unsound, right? So
he says they work, right? Isn't that the language he uses?
I think
in some sense they work,
said,
basically.
Yeah, that they're at least successful in moving the dial toward a belief in theism. So it seems to me in some sense he's saying they're sound. I'd like him to clarify that. But, look, I've talked to so many Christians, and I know so many Christians who have never had a supernatural experience, this kind of supernatural experience that Alex wants to have. Now, I have not a lot. I don't, maybe in my 50 years of life, I can maybe count 5 that I believe was some kind of a supernatural experience, but I know so many who have had 0 of those. So now these folks, these Christians who have had no kind of supernatural experience, and they think it's weird that when they hear me talk about that stuff, well, why are they Christians? Because the arguments and the evidence supports Christian theism. Now, I want to, I think of one of my friends. Her name is Dr. Dawn Simon. She's a PhD evolutionary biologist at the University of Nebraska here in Kearney. And she even wrote an article on the Free Thinking Ministries website if people want to see it. It's called Evidence in the Flesh for Apologetics. And she says that she would have rejected any experience, as it were. She would have rejected it as a hallucination. If she told me if she would have had a road to Damascus experience like the Apostle Paul had, that she would have written it off as a brain tumor or something was going on wrong with her faculties. She said that she prided herself as a rational academic and a scholar, and thus she needed arguments, not experiences. She would have written those off. So I just want to encourage Alex O'Connor, follow the evidence wherever it leads. You don't need experiences. I don't have to experience life on Mars to know I don't want to live there. I can learn about Mars. I can learn about Venus. I can learn about the moon. I don't have to experience it. Now, and also in regard to Alex's comments about divine hiddenness, I've published on this in academia. It's just really, I think, a silly argument or a silly reason to be an atheist. I don't think it's a good reason at all. Jacobus Erasmus and I co-authored an article dealing with and responding to John Schellenberg's hiddenness argument. And we showed that a maximally great being, like we talked about earlier when we were discussing the ontological argument, a maximally great being has really good reasons to allow non-resistant non-believers. So if Alex thinks he's a non-resistant non-believer and that's a deal breaker, therefore God doesn't exist, we show that is faulty thinking. We show that a maximally great being has really good reason for allowing non-resistant non-believers. So see our published journal article on that topic in, what journal was that? That was in Perichoresis, and I think published maybe a couple years ago now. So anyway, go ahead, guys. What do you think?
I think the root of this issue that we're actually talking about is conversion, ultimately. And I think conversion is somewhat complex, in contradistinction to some Calvinists, if I can put it that way. People need different things in order to be pricked in the heart, if I can put it that way. And the Holy Spirit, I believe, uses different things. And so it's like what you mentioned with your friend professor there at the University of Nebraska, right? She didn't need all the experience. She just needed the rational argumentation. Some people need the experience. Some people don't need either of those. They need something else, whatever that else or may be, whatever that particular, whether it's investigation, history, something, I don't know, whatever it is. And, at the end of the day, you hear someone like Alex say, these arguments are more persuasive, and they seem to be, let's say, reasonable explanations to believe in God. if you get that far and you're unwilling to say, okay, there must be some sort of higher being, or there's something about this argument that's pointing toward maybe there's multiple gods, you know. I mean, obviously you can tease out that would be the case, obviously from our standpoint, but you got some sort of higher being there, right? If you're unwilling to go that way after looking at the rational parts and admitting, hey, these are good arguments, cogent, wonderful, you know, that shows me that, okay, it's not just the rational side that this person is looking for. They need something else. Or it could be just a typical resistance to the conviction of the Holy Spirit using those arguments, right? I'll give you an example. He said he was an agnostic skeptic, but this particular person I interacted with at one time, it was several years ago now, said he was a skeptic. I think he was an atheist, but that aside, we had a discussion. He was talking about all these objections he's had for Christianity. I got to get all these objections out of the way before I can even believe in God. So I said, okay, well, what are some of your objections? He gave me one, and we talked about it. And I said, well, don't you think that's possible as a response to your objection, or even perhaps probable? He said, well, yeah, that's a good answer. And I said, okay, so that objection can't be on the table anymore. That one's been answered. Let's go to the next one. He's like, no, I can't do that. Well, that tells me something else is going on here.
Yeah.
Right? If you can't take an objection that you agree has been satisfactorily answered off of the table, there's something else going on, man.
Yeah, that's interesting, because in the past, and the reason I wanted to play the beginning of this is Alex has said that his mind has been changed before. So it's not that he's resistant to his mind being changed, right? He used to be vegan. Now he's not, because he realized it wasn't healthy. So his mind has changed, and he was he advocated for veganism. Like he was advocating for it. So, you know, I think there might be some temptation to be like, well, is he afraid of losing a platform? All this sort of stuff. He has shown the ability to change his mind, even when it comes to those sorts of things that could put in danger his platform. But I do wonder about like relationships and things like that. There's much more holding people back than a lot of people realize. I've said this even about Ben Shapiro before. Like even if he was close to convinced that Jesus is the Messiah, it's not like moving an agnostic to being convinced that Jesus is the Messiah when you're talking to an Orthodox Jew. Like there's so many more considerations for him personally to count the cost of making that next leap. So my question is, like, for somebody who is so logical and philosophically inclined, why the major on experience? That kind of surprised me, to say I need to have some
that
sort
is
of,
very interesting.
I need to have some sort of supernatural, and then he even hints at the fact that he would kind of hand wave away the ones that he's kind of received sometimes, right? He'd kind of be like,
that sounds like that sounds like Nagel. What's his first name? David?
Thomas.
Nagel, however you,
Thomas
Nagel or Nagel, however you pronounce his name. Same
Nagel,
guy, you know. He's, you know, and some of these others who has talked about, oh, I need to see this big thing in the sky. I am God. Listen to me. And he says, I wouldn't even believe then.
And right. It's like, and he doesn't want it. He doesn't want it. He says, I don't want it to be true.
I don't want it to be true, you know?
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if that's where Alex is. I can't see inside his head and his motivations and where he's at. But, you know, if he wants a sort of kind of experience, you know, hopefully God gives it to him. But if he doesn't, you know, I at the end of the day, he's still going to be held responsible for that unbelief, you know?
Especially given all the arguments.
Yeah, I like what Paul Copan says in his, I think it's his, it's a philosophy of religion text. It's a small little paperback. And in there, he talks about the hiddenness of God. And he says something along the lines of, you know, if you're seeking God, you have to seek him on his own terms. You can't demand how God's going to come and speak to you, you know, and how he's going to reveal himself to you. If he's revealed himself to you in these particular rational arguments, of which now you're persuaded are good and reasonable, and you're still rejecting, hey, you can't demand of God. He's God.
Mm-hmm.
You got to give me an experience.
This objection that Alex kind of holds up there, saying just the hiddenness. He needs to reveal himself specifically to me. I know that's been something our friend, I don't know if he's still watching, but the fallen ape theist, formerly known as the faithiest atheist, that's something that he's kind of articulated as well. The God would know what every single person would need in order to come to faith if he truly wants everyone to come to faith. I'm sorry if I'm straw manning you, Richard. I'm not meaning to. Does that sound similar to what you've heard him say?
Yeah.
Something
Definitely
like
would I've told Richard many times I want to have him on the show. I think you've had that same conversation. Josh, let's make it happen. Get Richard on the show.
We've got one scheduled for March.
Okay,
actually,
good.
He's going to come on. We're going to discuss some of this stuff. So
cool. You're going down, Richard.
No, he's going up because he's going to change his mind. And
he and I have squared off before in Texas. Yeah. We really did. You were there. Doesn't Alex's objection here, it feels awfully familiar to Richard's, or am I? I think that's fair. Well, I mean, definitely we'll let Richard let us know what he thinks. But yeah, I think you're onto something.
So if these are and I want to take, we can be skeptical about their objections if there's ulterior motives, that sort of thing, and I get that, but I want to take them at their word. What do we do as believers to, obviously pray for them, but is there anything that you guys can think of that we do to kind of continue to help try to move that dial?
Reason together. That's what we're devoted to, what we've devoted our lives to. And, obviously you want to be nice and respectful. I think according to the law of Christ, and that includes what Paul's teaching, we go out of our way to be respectful to non-believers when you're interacting with them. And both Jesus and Paul, however, show that they're willing to not be so respectful to the religious people. And Paul even shows that much to fellow churchgoers who are not living consistently. But to the outside world, we are to go above and beyond to be nice and respectful to. So I think that's what we have to do first. And then secondly, we just have to be reasonable, show that we have justification for our beliefs. And what I love to do is show that their beliefs ultimately end an epistemic meltdown. They can't know things about metaphysics and ultimate reality if their worldview is true. So you show them that their worldview falls apart, and you show them that if Christian theism is true, then we should expect to be able to do metaphysics and have to discover truth about ultimate reality and so much more. Show them the evidence for the existence of God with the kalam and the moral argument and the ontological argument and the fine-tuning argument, and the list goes on and on and on. So it's just, as Scripture says in Isaiah 1:18, "Come, let us reason together, saith the Lord." And so I think that is, you show love and reason, love and logic. Those two things combined are powerful. And, I think that's why guys like Richard Settles continues to hang out with us. And because we're respectful to him, he's respectful to us. And I think it's fair to say that we've grown to love each other as humans, right? We really care for each other, even though we have these big disagreements. But it's because we're both committed to love and logic. So.
I think it's about time for us to wrap up here, but I kind of want to end with this. We released a short on our YouTube that actually speaks to this very thing. I'm going to post it right now in the comments, hitting enter here. You had Dr. John DePoe on recently, not recently, like a year ago, but we released this short where he actually talks about this very thing. So go watch that short as well, where he talks about, hey, maybe you've been convinced by the arguments, but you can't get yourself to the place where you need to worship. And he gives a little bit of a prescription to get yourself out of that I thought was very helpful. So watch that short and then watch the entire interview because it's very good. I think it's about knowledge. What really is knowledge or something like that. So
he's an epistemologist, so an expert in that area.
Yeah. All right, guys, this has been really fun. Thanks for joining us, Dr. Peter Rasor.
Yeah, we've got to teach Peter how we sign off.
Oh, yes, we do. So let's do it. As we always say here at Free Thinking Ministries, stay
reasonable.
That's what we say.
Stay reasonable.
So let's do it one more
Next
time.
That's reasonable.
That's reasonable. All right. Thanks for joining us. It was great. God bless. Have a great time. And as we always say at Free Thinking Ministries, stay reasonable.
Stay reasonable. Peter, you were late, dude.